What if you could scrape flight prices directly from Google without touching a single airline API? Today I'm going to show you how to build a flight scraper using Python and SerpAPI that pulls information about the flight routes, the layovers, the prices, and all of that is going to happen in real time. Before we go into the details of creating this price scraper, I would like to show you the stats of my YouTube channel, and this basically shows that 95% of you are not subscribed to the channel. You can help me tremendously by subscribing to this channel, commenting below the videos, and liking the content if you find it useful. Now let's go back to the video. In today's video we're going to use SerpAPI, which is going to give us access to all the data from Google Flights. So in order to get access to SerpAPI, what you need to do is you need to go to serpapi.com and you need to register. It's completely free to register and you get around 200 API calls per month. So you can experiment, you can build all sorts of applications. And also SerpAPIs comes with many different APIs. So you get access to all the Google APIs like Google Search API, Google Hotel API, Flights API, and many other APIs that I'm going to show you in their documentation later on. So once you have registered in serpapi.com, what you need to do is you need to basically go to your account and then you will see that there will be an API key over there, and basically you need to copy this API key and save it because we need that in our Python script. So you can see that there's many different APIs that are provided by SerpAPI. So you've got Google Finance, Google Events, Google AI, and many other APIs which you can take a look at. But today we're mainly going to focus on the Google Flights API. Once you have your SerpAPI key, the next step is to go to PyCharm and create a new project. So I've already created a new project which is called Flight Price Scraper, and it contains 3 different files. So one of them is keys.api, and this is the file that contains our SerpAPI key. And then we have 2 other files. One of them is app.py, and then we have index.html, which lives in the templates folder. So we're going to build a simple Flask application which is going to have only one page, and then we can see how we can utilize this in order to query the SerpAPI, which is going to give us the flight data that we're interested in. So we start with populating app.py. So basically we need to import some of the Flask utilities. So we import the Flask class, render template, and request. And after this we import the requests library because we need to make a call to the SerpAPI, and for this purpose we're going to use the requests API. And as I pointed out earlier, we just need to import the SerpAPI key from our keys module. After this, we create a Flask application by passing the module name into the constructor of this class. And finally, we need to create an index page. So this is going to be a one-page application. And you can see that the route resolves to the main route, and we want to basically process 2 different methods. So that's get and post. And after this we create a list which is going to contain the flight data. So in here let's first look at the get method. So what we do by default is we just render template, and then this is going to be the index template, and flight data in this case is going to be an empty list. If the request is a post request, then in this case, what we're going to do is basically we're going to get all the different fields about our flight preferences from the form which is going to be created in our index.html page. And in here, what we're doing is we're basically extracting all the different fields from this form. So we've got the flight origin, the destination, and then the outbound date. After this, we're creating this dictionary, which contains different values which the SerpAPI needs in order to process our request. So the first parameter is engine. So we're basically telling the SerpAPI use the Google Flights API because, as I showed you earlier, the SerpAPI contains many underlying APIs provided by Google. And then we have departure ID, which will be set to origin. We have arrival ID, which is set to destination. Outbound date is outbound date. Then in here we've got type 2, and if we go to the documentation, let's see what type actually means. So when you go to SerpAPI and then you log into your account, you can click on Google Flights API, and then in here you will get detailed explanation about what the different parameters mean. And in here you can see that there is something called type. So what does type mean? So parameter defines the type of the flights, and then you can see that by default it's set to 1, which means the type of the trip is a round trip. And then if we want this to be just a one-way ticket or a one-way trip, then we need to set it to 2. And then if we want this to be a multi-city trip, then we need to set this to 3. So in our case, I've set the type to 2, which means that this is just going to be a one-way ticket or a one-way trip. And then there is also another parameter which you can play with, and this is called stops. And this is not very intuitive because if you set stops to 1, it's not going to do what you think it's going to do. So let's see what it actually does. So you can see this is the stops parameter, and by default it's set to 0, which means that it can give you flights with any number of stops. And then if stops is set to 1, then this means that it's going to give you only non-stop flights. So you can see that this is not very intuitive. So I just wanted to show you the stops parameter. I'm not going to use it in our demo. And last but not least, we need to pass our API key in this dictionary. And we're just saying API key is basically our key from SerpAPI. And after this, what we need to do is we need to perform a GET request against the SerpAPI website. And this is the main URL which you need to use, and you need to pass the parameters into this argument. And if the request is successful, then basically you'll get a JSON response. If the JSON response contains any errors, then you can basically display those errors on the index page. So you can see here that there is an error argument or variable which we're passing to the index page, and then we're extracting the contents from data which have an error. And if we don't have any errors, then what we do is we extract the best flights from this data that we got back from the SerpAPI. And finally, we're passing the flight data to our index.html page, which is where all the data is going to be rendered. So as you can see, the data from the SerpAPI comes in JSON format, and this is the main benefit of using this API compared to creating our own scraper that goes to Google Flights directly and then it scrapes all the HTML page, and it tries to figure out what the flights are, what the prices are, and all that kind of stuff. And also SerpAPI has agreements in place with Google, so you can basically use the SerpAPI in production systems without basically worrying that your scraper is going to stop working, because if you implement your own scraper using Selenium or any other scraping library, then you might face some issues, and then basically you need to handle like different captcha dialogues and all that kind of stuff, and maybe your IP is going to be blacklisted, and all of a sudden you're going to lose access to all of the scraping functionality that you might have built. And that's why we're using the SerpAPI, which handles all of this for you, and you don't need to worry about being blocked or unable to perform any requests. So what we're going to look at next is the index.html page, and this is where we render all the information from the flight data. So let me show you. I'm not going to go through all the details in the styling section because they're not so important, at least for me, because I would rather build something that's functional rather than making it look nice and pretty. Obviously, I spent some time to define the styles and make this look pretty, but first I focus on delivering the actual value, the actual working mechanism for the application before I focus on making it look nice. And in here you can see in the body section of this HTML page we have a container which is called which is a class container. And so after this we've got a header, flight price, scraper, and then we define our form, which contains all the input fields that the user needs to fill in. So we've got the origin of the flight, and then we have this label which is called from, and then we have an input box, and then this input box is where users can type the name of any airport that they like. And then we have the same for the destination, so we have a label, and then we have basically a placeholder. And after this we've got this outbound date, which is basically a date picker, where the users can pick a date that they're interested in. And then we have a submit button, which basically submits the form, and then it triggers the basically triggers the Flask route with the post request. After this we've got this check, so basically if we have any errors then they're going to be displayed on the screen, and then we're adding some styling just to highlight that there are some errors. And finally, last but not least, we've got this for loop which iterates over the list of flights, and it basically creates all the individual cards that you saw on the screen. So we've went through H1, which is the header of this page. We went through the two labels, from and to, and then where you type the origin of your flight and the destination. Then we went through outbound date, the date picker, and then the button. And what we haven't covered yet is basically how we build those cards that display like information about each individual flight. And you can see that this is kind of one card which contains information about one option for the flights, and you can see that some of them have a layover, and then the last flight it doesn't have a layover, but then as you can guess it's more expensive. So let's look at the HTML page and see how we create those cards. So we have this for loop, so we basically iterate over each individual flight, and then each flight object contains information about the flight itself. So first we're creating the header, which contains information about the total price of the flight and then the total duration. After this, we define the actual body of the card, and you can see here we iterate over each individual leg from the flight. And as I mentioned before, some of the flights might have layover, and each leg is basically the individual flight. So in here, what we're doing is basically we're getting the airline logo, and then we're also adding some hint. So when the users hover over the logo, then it's going to basically show the airline name. And yeah, after this, we're just setting the name of the airline and then the flight number. After this, we've got the airport departure, basically the departure airport. Then we have the ID of the airport, the departure time, and then we have the duration of this flight. And last but not least, we've got the name of the arrival airport, the ID of the airport, and the time. So this section of the HTML page is dedicated to flights which have a layover. And then in here we're basically saying, okay, if a given flight has a layover, then we want to basically create a small container that has information about the layover, like the total duration of the layover. So for styling this HTML page, I've used Bootstrap, and you can see that there is a link to the Bootstrap library at the bottom of this HTML page. So now what we can do is we can go to app.py, we can run this module, and this is basically going to start our Flask application on this URL. And then we can go to our web browser, just refresh this page, and you can see that we're getting information. So we basically successfully hit this page. And yeah, so this is the starting point of our page where users can enter the origin of their flight, the destination, and the date. And let's say that we want to fly from Heathrow to John F. Kennedy, which is in New York, and we want to pick, let's say, Saturday. And yeah, finally what we need to do is we need to click on the button search flights, and in here you can see all the different flight options. So in this case we didn't get a flight with a layover, but yeah, you can see that the flight prices are basically insane because I picked 23rd of August, which is basically in 4 days time, and you can see basically all the different prices, the durations, the airport names, the aircraft type, the flight number, all the logos, and so on. And yeah, so we can just quickly do a comparison between the data that's displayed in our page and then the data that we have on Google Flights. So I just went to Google Flights from Google, and basically I typed in London Heathrow to John F. Kennedy, 23rd of August, and you can see that the flight prices are the same as the ones that are displayed in our application. So this is 1646, and then two flights which are basically 2866. If we go back to our website, then you can see 1646 and then 2866. So this is just to show you that all the information that we got from the SerpAPI matches the information that's actually displayed in Google Flights. So that's how you scrape flight information from Google Flights using Python and SerpAPI. In the next video, I'm going to take this even further by setting up a price tracker that sends you alerts on Telegram or email alerts whenever a flight drops below your target budget. Subscribe if you don't want to miss this out. If you found this video helpful, please like it and subscribe to the channel. If you want to get access to this Flask application, you can sign up to my school community. The link should be down below in the description. Thank you very much for your time and see you in the next video.